So, welcome to week 2. This is a brief mini lecture introduction to what we'll be looking at this coming week, as well as a little bit of a recap from our readings week 1. So, as some of you have mentioned from the last week's primary source readings, we have the Spanish, French, and English point of view, but what about the indigenous people? This is a history class, so we're mainly covering written history, and American Indians didn't have written records, so a lot of that perspective is left out, especially when we're looking at primary sources. So as we go through the semester, we need to remember to think about which perspectives the voices we are listening to come from, and which voices are not being heard. How, as historians, can we balance that? I have attached a journal article to this week's reading material that might help you explore that in terms of finding the Native American voice. It is rather long. It's 32 pages, and I understand that you're limited with your time as to how much you can read. It's there if you want to look at it. Go ahead and download it and keep it, and if you want to revisit it at some point, you will have it. So last week we started with the first sustained European settlement in North America, the Spanish. And the Spanish have a long history with the natives of the Americas, and as you've read with the primary sources, not all of it was positive. The Spanish were definitely not peaceful colonizers, and the story of their rocky relations with the indigenous population has been called the Black Legend. And so the English used this to their own advantage. In justifying their interests in colonizing the land, they declared it was necessary to save the Indians from the brutal control of the Spanish, using that idea of the Black Legend. And so we begin this week by looking at the English colonization of North America. This will be from the perspective of English Protestants and their concern with the missionary advances of Catholic nations such as Portugal, Spain, and France. We do have to keep a close eye on what's happening in England and in continental Europe at this time. The bloody battles between Roman Catholics and Protestant reformers are important to our story here. These turbulent and brutal years in England and Europe shaped the direction that colonization would take in the New World, and these same battles would continue on new ground. England believed that it was vitally important for it to establish colonies in North America to advance its own interests. And two Protestant clergymen, Richard Hakluyt, who you read last week, and Samuel Purchas, made very forceful arguments on behalf of English rights to pursue colonization. They made it clear that for the spread of the right kind of religion, a true and sincere religion, it must be Protestant and not Catholic. Hakluyt argued for a distinctive approach with the idea that, unlike France or Spain, English colonization would take place in the form of settlements and towns as opposed to trading posts and forts. As a side note here, there's been some great studies recently on how England first practiced this plantation style of occupation on the Irish first before it moved on to North America. And so I urge you, if you have interest in that, to reach out. I can get you some books, some journal articles if you have interest in that. So in this fight to establish this true religion, England felt it must meet the challenge to become a strong colonial and missionary power. And you can read about the particulars in your readings in your textbook, Gustad, pages 30 through 48, which will really kind of get into the detail of that. For this week's primary sources, you'll first look at Sir Thomas More's Utopia. He was the first person to write of a utopia and to use this word to describe a perfect imaginary world. More's book imagines a complex, self-contained community set on an island in which people share a common culture and a way of life. At the very heart of the work is a vital question: can a perfect world ever be realized? And I think looking at this primary source is important when thinking about what people's thought processes were in establishing a new world here in North America. Read the other primary documents to get an idea of what the English perspective was. There are ideas of what noble work was, and being done by the providence of an almighty God. I think you'll find John Hammond's account of ministers during the years of the Virginian Company interesting. In his work, he conceded that for a period, the colony had been compelled to accept too many ministers, those who could babble in a pulpit and roar in a tavern. So I think that will be an interesting read. You'll also begin reading David D. Hall's World of Wonder, Days of Judgment. In this book, he introduces us to the theme of popular religion in New England during the colonial era. He argues that during this time, religion was embedded in the everyday life of people. For much of Christian Europe, he says, it seems plausible to distinguish between two Christianities, the one the clerics taught and the other that the peasants, or what he calls the lower social order, practiced. But what about those that came to New England, those that weren't peasants, those of middling status? He argues that emigration simplified the religious cultural system by making it more uniform. So do not think of it as divided between folk ways of the lower common people and the higher clergy. His book really works to break down the barriers between the two. And I hope you find the book interesting. I know I did when I read it for one of my graduate courses. In addition to the readings in your syllabus, I have added a few additional materials for you to contemplate if you have time. I hope that listening to some of the examples of the sacred music, for example, will help paint a more clear picture of the world of early Americans. So that's it for this week. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is on the syllabus. Thank you.